Welcome to the Monday morning mixtape. On this week's show, for some reason, we're talking about Ireland and Eurovision. So stay tuned. Welcome to this week's show. So we're taking a bit of a 90-degree
180-degree turn.
But that'd be back on what we'd normally do.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, no, wouldn't. No, that'd be kind of like...
Yeah,
that'd be just going in a straight line, Laura.
Okay. It's directly opposed to metal then.
Yeah.
This week we're just talking about angles.
Yeah. What's your favourite angle? I quite like obtuse angles myself.
Yes.
Really? I like it cute.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, they do have that in the name. Yeah.
Yes.
And the isosceles triangle, I suppose that'd be an fan favourite.
Pythagorean type stuff. Yes.
You spent many a long, cold night looking at those
triangles. Yeah.
And did they go jingle jangle? Since we're talking about Irish
that
songs.
old triangle. No, there was more of a H.P. Lovecraft thing, like the witch house. Was it the witch house? You know that one where it's like they have his whole story about like the angles of houses were like gateways into other dimensions.
Oh, really? Ah.
Yep.
Or you
can't say I've read that now.
Fantastic misspelling on Facebook where they're with the angles now.
Oh yeah. I got saved by an 87-degree angle.
You're such an angle. Thank you so much. Anyway,
one thing I used to really like looking at on Twitter was when people we looked it up, like a lot of people would always misspell definitely as defiantly. And it completely changed the context of what they were saying.
Yes, I'm defiantly going to do that.
I defiantly have AIDS. All right.
Oh, wonderful.
But I don't believe in modern medicine.
But yes, hold me now.
Yeah, no one will have a clue. This week's show we're talking about Eurovision. We have a lot of listeners from outside of Europe, so I suppose it'd probably
trying to explain what Eurovision is. Yes.
There was a movie on Netflix a while ago with Will Ferrell. I think it's just called Eurovision, and it pretty much is spot on to the way the Eurovision is. It started off in the 60s, maybe the 50s. I don't know. It's not a history lesson. But
maybe it is.
It started off in 1956.
All right. But it was kind of like an amateur songwriter and performers competition. So it's not like you're not going to have the likes of Beyonce and Jay-Z
doing more angles.
Doing stuff. Yeah. For it. It was just kind of a thing to give other people an opportunity to shine and win prizes. And as well, I suppose it ended up, as it went on, it did become more professional. More professional people were entering into it. And I suppose the production values became a lot bigger and better, and it became a thing then where people really wanted to win it. It almost
became a bit political as well then, because each country basically sent forth their best amateur performer, and then it became a whole thing where like countries who were beside one another tended to kind of like, oh, I'll vote for my friend.
But as well, the best way of it being described that I've ever heard is after 2 world wars that kind of took place in a good part in Europe. Europe decided we need another way to fight our wars. So they decided to have a song contest where the best would succeed and the worst would be just
killed.
Well, maybe not.
That's why you never hear the people when they lose again.
That's true. And just so everybody knows as well, it's
public opinion.
It is super kitschy and it's like you're not going to, there's a few sort of decent entries and all the rest, but it is very kind of like it's like sort of The Voice, or it's like the X Factor, except not even as glitzy and glammy as that.
It's kind of like they're a few years behind what's popular. So even if you go back looking at it through the 70s, it would have been like 5 years after the Bee Gees were popular, everyone would have had people that looked and sounded like the Bee Gees entering it, but like cheap knockoffs. So it's kind of like the Lidl of popular music. Where it's like a value brand,
pound shop
performers,
but very endearing at the same point. And it's like, that's the thing. I mean, you make it sound like it's really rubbish, but it is. It's rubbish, but in a very endearing. It's like The Room.
It's like the musical competition version of The Room.
I don't know about that. There are there have been ABBA came out of it, so.
Yeah, but how many other people?
Yes.
Yeah, and
Lordi didn't come out of it.
I think ABBA existed beforehand as well. I think that's kind of like, people cheating by putting in
they're decent performers and stuff like that.
And then Ireland cheated as well with Michael Flatley, so.
Yeah. Well, this is
they didn't actually enter.
Yeah,
they were kind of like the half-time kind of performance.
Yeah, in Ireland.
But anyway.
Yeah, but as well,
Yes.
it turned into a thing as well, because I think people didn't really give a shit about it in the 50s and 60s and the 70s about winning it. But then when, like, it became apparent that countries that did win it, they'd make a load of money from people coming over to see it as it got bigger and bigger and bigger.
And just so people know, the winner got to host the competition the next year, so that's why you end up making
So it was
a lot of
very
money
big for
out of it.
Ireland. It was very important for Ireland because Ireland, like, for a large part, relies on tourism. And as well, Ireland was trying to sell itself to the rest of the world because up until, a lot of people don't really know this, up until maybe the 50s or the 60s, well, actually maybe the fucking 70s, Ireland was a bit like the North Korea of Europe. Ireland was like only trade with Ireland. No, you don't report news about Ireland outside of Ireland, which is still kind of a thing. It's only like good news stories go out, but I suppose a lot of countries are like that. But Ireland, it was like actually part of Ireland. And Ireland wouldn't trade with other countries. For a large part, it was like everything had to be grown in Ireland. And
they were like, oh yeah, why would we need this? And then a lot of people were like, well, because, we don't want to be pouring more. Oh, I hadn't thought of it now.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult growing bananas and fucking...
Well, it was a bit about protectionism as such. It was kind of like trying to big up sort of Irish sort of produce and stuff like that. It was trying to protect like sort of the Irish
But it ended
traders.
up isolating Ireland an awful lot. And then it was when Ireland actually joined Europe officially, as in the EEC, or the EU now, in the 70s. It opened up a load of things with the trade, and Ireland started kind of like developing because it was like, I suppose, a third world country to a large part. Up to, and then it was like developing in the 70s and the 80s, and then in the 90s it would have came into its own and been like, up there with the rest of them. With things. Well, yeah, that's a
kind of a very quick history, I suppose,
what
really.
the Eurovision is. And I suppose, like, we went off looking at, like, there's videos up on it that has like all the entries, and you get to see it's like really what we did, and like remember all the big ones ourselves growing up in Ireland, you remember more. But when Ireland started entering into it, it seemed it was in the 60s, and they're actually quite good singers, but it was all that show band stuff, which was really popular in Ireland.
And Ireland did it so well, absolutely so well, yeah.
Well, which is kind of, for people who aren't familiar, show bands, it's like picture Elvis, but sing, well, actually Frank Sinatra and all those, they'd be like show bands. They were like, the Irish people would have kind of copied those, and they would have sang with American accents, tried to sound like those, but they had big brass bands playing with them.
Like there's a whole thing, there's a thing called the mid-Atlantic accent, or the transatlantic accent, and it is this whole thing where Ireland did have a very big kind of an American influence on it, because an awful lot of Irish people, when they emigrated, naturally went to America. It was either England or America you emigrated to. So a lot of the influence is brought back home from America from returning immigrants and all the rest. There's like Boston, New York, all the big
it's the thing. Well, even other than that, kind of like prior to, like, the American accent is actually comes from an Irish. It's a mixture of an Irish and Dutch accent.
Yeah.
And then I suppose it would have changed with kind of like Italian and kind of like, kind of Mexican and Spanish, kind of like with it coming into. But it is, when you hear it, hey, forget about it. It's bizarrely, it's Irish.
Boston
accent.
is specific, obviously, as well. There's a lot of Irish American in Boston and the rest, so you do have a bit of that going on.
But like New York was founded and built by the Dutch and the Irish. The boroughs, that was where it all came from, but that's where, like, the New York accent is essentially that.
Yeah, there's twangs of it there.
Yeah.
But of course then you had the influence coming back the way then as well, that a lot of what was going on in America was seen as sort of like, hey, this is cool, and this is sort of something that Irish people did quite well. They had the kind of the show band era, and that was, there was like the Miami show band, there was all the big ones back then and all the rest, and that was exactly what Ireland was that was what was in all the dance halls, that was what was popular, so henceforth that was what was sent to the Eurovision. Yeah,
there was like Butch Moore walking in the streets in the rain, but there was a fella, Dickie Rock, and yes, that is his fucking name.
Dickie Rock.
In
and the
60s.
catchphrase when
and he's
everyone
from where we're from,
down around the south, southeast. And one of the catchphrases that people used to go mad for him, like they used to go mad for like Elvis and the Beatles and the concerts and all the rest. And this terrible catchphrase, which wouldn't fly in coronavirus times, obviously, people
spit on me, Dickie.
Spit on me, Dickie. Yeah. And can you, like, just the absolute horror of that particular phrase is just like, and just so everybody is aware as well, a sort of slang word for the male genitalia in Ireland is Dickie as well, so that just adds an extra dimension of horror to the whole phrase.
So people find and Mickey as well.
Mickey
That's
and
why
Dickie.
people to be always laughing at Disney stuff. It's like Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, and there's this whole thing like sort of, you know, sew your own Mickey and stuff like that. And people are like, sew your Mickey, paper Mickey, But anyway.
Did you go listening to any of those early ones, Mark, at all?
Well, the early entries.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I went back and listened to some of the ones that would have won, because there definitely would be a big streak from kind of like the 70s down to like to the early 90s, where Ireland had a very big winning streak, and I think, as far as I'm aware, to this day they still hold the most wins in the Eurovision of all time.
Three in a row, I think, were the only ones.
Three in a row, and I think 7 total is still, for a country, is still the highest.
And then it's very much like people have seen the Father Ted episode about the Eurovision entry. What kind of happened was, but we'll get into that later on, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I listened to those a bit, but then I went back and listened to the ones I would have kind of grown up with as well, with like Mickey Joe Hart and Chris Dorn.
Yeah, we'll get into all those. We'll try and do it kind of like in a timeline thing, so we don't get kind of confused. Like, I mean, we'll get there fucking quick enough anyway, because it's kind of, I suppose, the 60s it was just like Ireland, and then the 70s was
because Ireland came into it, like, as I said, like Eurovision started in 1956, but Ireland started kind of participating in it in 1965.
And then it was 1970, they had the first one with Dana, with all kinds of everything. I don't know if people, but like, I mean, Dana since kind of like went, I suppose she was kind of seen as like a sprite, kind of like a fairy kind of thing. She's very kind of like, like Mr. Burns. We were only talking about before we came, like Mr. Burns when he gets fucking kind of like, when he's getting those injections, and he's mistaken by as an alien. Yeah, she does, doesn't she? Sounds exactly that. But like, she since went on and became like a politician in Ireland, and she wasn't president, was she?
She ran for president.
She did?
I think she did.
Yeah, I think she did.
She went on the nominations.
Yeah, she's very, I suppose, what would be Christian.
Yeah, but kind of right wing, a little bit sort of like that, but like sort of standing for like family values and that kind of Christian sort of, you know,
Catholic bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, Catholic stuff.
Yeah.
Where she's, and that was the whole kind of selling point with her. But I think,
yeah, she's
you know, like
a
with a
very
lot of people,
clean cut, kind of like, oh, look at her, good. She was only like 16 or something like that, I think, when she was sent over.
I think so, yeah.
Wasn't it? Very young. But but it was like this whole wholesome. It was kind of like picture like Snow White or Alice in, you know. So it was one of these sort of like Alice in Wonderland. If you could have had a Disney character come to life from like that whole sort of, she was like a Disney character basically sent over to Eurovision. I think that's how I would describe her, like one of these wholesome young girls out of a Disney character.
and I suppose that kind of like, because Ireland was doing all right up until that point with stuff, and then it was like that was when Ireland really came into it, and I think became like a contender.
Yeah, because
like
I mean,
Rocky.
this really just sort of like everyone was like, oh my god, Ireland is one to watch in the Eurovision.
And then similar to Rocky, got too big for their boots and got slapped down.
Well, you see, this is the
Stop
trouble.
paying their taxes
by
to the IRS.
Clubber Lang came along, beat the shit out of Dana.
Yeah.
What you talking about, Dana? Pity the fool.
The Eurovision, for anyone who doesn't know, they do have this kind of, it's this sort of begrudgery kind of a thing, where if somebody starts winning quite a lot, they kind of go, well, even if they submit like the most fantastic song one year, if they've won before, they're kind of like, not voting for them again this year. Who do they think they are? We're going to vote for somebody else this year.
Yeah, which is funny, because the last time Ireland won was, I think, in the 90s, but there's still that mentality where it's like, they're a bit too big for their britches still.
Yeah,
Let's get
exactly.
someone
Not
else.
voting for them.
And I think that was the thing then, like the 70s was like a wasteland for Ireland in the Eurovision.
Teenage wasteland.
Yeah, they were doing that. Oh, I was surprised by, Mark, I don't know if you remember, there was a TV presenter called Maxi.
And she was like, it was one of these like single sort of name persons like Bono or like Madonna. She was just known as Maxi.
But it was only one
I hate her already.
Yeah, she entered into the Eurovision, or she was in like the early 70s, but it was just when they were going through the videos and she came up and I was like, what the fuck?
Maxi? What is she doing on it? Yeah.
So like she managed to create a whole fucking career.
But this is the thing with a lot of the Eurovision entries. They do tend to do that. You get big enough and you get famous enough, off the back of a Eurovision entry, and then everyone kind of knows it, so you kind of go, oh, I'll just go home and I'll have a show out of it, and then suddenly you're into like the state broadcaster, and once you're in there, they just kind of keep creating these shows, these vehicles for you. Vehicles. Let's have that argument again. Why don't we, about the pronunciation of vehicles?
Oh, apparently, I'm just looking up about her. She joined a supergroup. She was in another band and they had a car crash and they all got really, really badly hurt. She ended up getting amnesia and needed more than 100 surgical suitures. So stitches.